or Iglesia ni Cristo. And good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of INCRadio Florida. I'm one of your hosts, Brother Robert Topalis, here in Tampa, Florida. Today, of course, is Saturday, the 22nd of February. Unbelievable how fast this year is already moving. It's about 9:30 in the morning here on the East Coast of the United States, which means it's a little past 10:30 in the evening there back in the Philippines. So if you're watching us, we are so grateful that you're staying up late to watch us. But I can guarantee you today was the right day to stay up late because we are super excited to have back on the show one of our favorite hosts and experts in the field of how to get your thumb green. And I don't mean by painting it, but keeping that thumb green. And that would be, of course, our beloved brother Jim. But before we do that, I want to toss it over to Sister Joy to give us a quick shout out to all of our international viewers. How are things over there in Orlando this morning, Sister Joy?
Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us. We are so delighted to have all of you with us today, and thank you for all of our viewers who are joining with us on our YouTube chat. Please be sure to say where you are from. Good morning, buenos dias, guten morgen. We are delighted to have you, and we're also very delighted to have Brother Jim with us again because we're excited to dive in and talk about all things that are green that are going on here in Florida. But I will say here in the central area, it is a bit chilly. So I'm interested to see, Brother Jim, if you can tell us like what the weather is what the weather you're experiencing up there in the Panhandle, because it's pretty chilly here. We're in the 60s here in Central Florida.
You know what I couldn't believe, Sister Joy, was that yesterday when I woke up and looked at the temperature for a second, I had to check to make sure that I had my location right because it said it was 38 degrees in Florida.
Really? Yes. And we thought that we were kind of over the hump, right, of like winter, but here it is.
There obviously somebody didn't get the memo. But, you know,
Bring those jackets back out.
Yeah, the How to Survive Winter episode was like 3 weeks ago. So apparently they didn't get the memo. But well, we're going to learn today how it is that we're supposed to be able to care for these plants, get them ready and geared up for spring. So let's go ahead and introduce our guest. Good morning, Brother Jim from up there in Pensacola. Tell us how are things doing up there, and welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Robert, Joy, Charisse. I love it like being back home, and even I am in my home, as a matter of fact. But thank you so much for having me. Of course, what Brother Robert said, he wanted me to talk about gardening and asked me to come back. I was thrilled. Anybody that knows me, of course, I'm probably quick to talk anyway, but I will definitely talk with anyone about gardening, growing, and of course that all leads to my favorite part, and that is the eating. But yeah, today I plan to help everybody get started with the garden. It sounds like it's a kind of cold, and and forgive us from Florida when we complain about 60 degrees as a high. But
yeah, I think we're a little spoiled. A couple of episodes ago, I think it was Sister Charisse, we were talking about the winter and what happens and how to survive winter here in Florida, and just being able to layer our clothing, because I think that's probably the reason we complain so much, is it gives us an excuse to be able to throw on that extra layer, right, Sister Charisse?
Oh, most definitely. I feel like Florida is the only location where you can get 4 seasons in 1 week. So it's either rainy and muggy, and then the next day it's in the 30s and it's very cold and cloudy, and then the next day it's bright and sunny but 50s. So we've just been experiencing an assortment of weather. I don't know how to dress. I'm not sure if I should go out and wear a raincoat and some boots, but then I look funny in the afternoon when it's sunny and in the 60s. So I'm just never sure of how I should
bring it all.
The back of our cars look like a wardrobe closet. That's
it does.
So, Brother Jim, talking about all of this variety that we've got in the temperatures here, and like Sister Charisse said, we can experience 4 seasons in a week, 3 of those seasons probably in one day.
But if you are planning to get that garden ready as we're emerging out of winter, this horrific winter that we have here in Florida, how do we? Is that dramatic enough for everybody? How do we? How
I
do
was
we?
gonna say, I don't know if it's considered horrific for all of our other, neighbors out there.
Our friends up north who are currently there in the Midwest suffering through minus 12 degrees. But how, Brother Jim, do we get our gardens ready for what we're expecting to be another beautiful Florida spring?
Yeah, well, I tell you what, you talk about the Midwest, and I just have to say, because I noticed over my shoulder here, that's the farm I grew up on in Ohio. So yeah, I am originally a Midwesterner, and those minus 10, minus 20, they would happen. And a lot of gardening, obviously it's about the seasons. And as you go through the seasons, you do different things. My biggest thrill, in Florida is that we can really grow things. In most places, we can have something growing and something that we can eat all the entire year. Growing up in Ohio, it was really this idea of spring was the time you started to go and work the soil and do those things. But here in Florida now, and really as much as 2 or 3 weeks ago, especially for Southern Florida, is a great time to start working the soil. And what I've done today, and Brother Robert, thank you for your help. I want to share some images with you about, showing me and my son and my wife getting that soil prepared, because there's never a time when you need to start and finish a garden, in all honesty, because there's things that need to be done, and because the soil is the most important thing. Notice I didn't say dirt. I get a little, you want to get me irritated, call it dirt. Because it is soil. Soil is
Many
really...
apologies if I have ever called it dirt, Brother Jim.
I won't hold it against you.
And I will apologize in advance.
I've learned to grow a thicker skin, but
Is it proper to consider soil dirty?
well, you can. I like to say rich.
Rich. Oh, there you go. That's
see how
that's the marketing guy talking right now. That's the,
Nice word.
With my 5-year-old, he comes home. He doesn't come home rich. He comes home dirty. So, so we'll go to the first slide. I'll kind of show you. So we took these pictures a couple weeks ago. But one of the things about gardening, and especially backyard gardening, talking about my farm, it was kind of more of an, you did have that end of the season, and you focused on just preparing the soil. But here in Florida, a lot of things over winter. Even in Ohio, some things over winter, and that's a pot. What you're looking at here is a pot of oregano and mustard green. And they survived the snow. They survived, because we had snow this year in Florida. It's very exciting. And another cool thing about backyard gardening versus, kind of working 5, 20, or 100 acres, when you have little pots and you have the raised bed that's down on the corner, you can see in that little corner, there's some seeds that never sprouted, but they decided about the beginning of February to go ahead and sprout. And, farming, we call these volunteers, right? Aptly named. But there's some volunteer kale coming up in that corner. It was a little protected by that lemongrass, which had long since died through the winter. But taking advantage of some of these plants in your garden where the seeds, maybe you had a tomato that you forgot about, and it dropped down and you started growing a tomato. It's fun. It's like a bonus plant. So that's kind of my bonus kale that started this year. You go to the next slide. So when I was talking about going, you can tell he's got the thumbs up, but he's not necessarily very excited, because I kind of said, okay, this Saturday morning, we're going to go out and clean the beds. And, first that word clean, he knew that very well. And he said, I'm not that interested in it. And then, the beds, he didn't quite get to that. But you can see a lot of the weeds have kind of grown up in that bottom corner. And so when you go out to your soil for the first time, you really want to, remove all the weeds. It's great to have those volunteers, and as you're pulling them, you might save a little bit here and there. But really, this is kind of the first step for preparing your soil, and that's to kind of remove everything. And there's a big reason for that. If you have some greens growing up, or if you have a lot of like dead leaves and things like that, dead leaves and all that you can use for mulch later in the season. But anything that's decaying is going to be robbing nitrogen from your plant, because in that process of it breaking down, it needs nitrogen, so it steals it from your plants. And nitrogen is very important, because it's going to help your plants have these nice leafy greens. And that's especially important when plants first start. Later it might have a tomato, later, it might have corn, or corn or whatever. But that life cycle of the plant really starts with the green. So you want to make sure the nitrogen is high, and you don't want anything competing with the seeds that you're putting as they grow. So if we go to the next slide, when you're clearing everything out, you want to make sure it's okay to leave a little bit of the roots, old root systems and things like that. You can see this pot, a lot of time I use a lot of big pots just to grow, especially my herbs, or, maybe I've got a variety that I haven't really tried, so I don't want to dedicate an entire bed to it. But I use these big pots. But I like to think of these big pots as a soil factory, right? And why I call them a soil factory is because most seeds, when they're young, their root systems are very shallow. That's why it's really important when plants are young to keep them well watered, to keep them protective. It's just like a baby, they don't have that hardiness for the elements yet. So those root systems are very shallow. And a lot of times when you buy pots, people that go out, they'll buy pots and they're really deep. And the pots I use are deep. But really that bottom space is wasted for the majority of the life of the plant. So I take advantage of that space by taking my compost and packing it down at the bottom. And then I'll put better soil up on top. And through the season, that soil at the bottom is going to, that compost, those garden scraps, are going to decay, and they're going to start releasing some nutrients. Another cool thing is they provide heat. As things decay, they generate heat. There's a lot of chemical processes going on, but that generation of heat also helps my plants to grow, especially early in the season, because you want that extra heat. You can also do this in your larger beds. You can take that raw compost, and I'll give you an example of some raw compost here, just because I haven't taken it. My wife was telling me I needed to take this out.
I was going to say, are you, if you're walking around with a compost inside the house, is that something that you shouldn't
it's not
keeping in home for too long?
recommended. Keep your compost organized. We actually have a container, and I've let it get too filled up. But you can see there's all kinds of stuff in there. I've got the eggshells, I've got the lemon peels, I've got some rice, I've got burnt oatmeal that I forgot about on the stove. So there's a lot of stuff you can use. Any garden scrap is going to be good. And a lot of, where people are, they're spending a lot of money on vitamins and supplements and things like that. And that's largely because on these commercial farms, and ours was somewhat of a commercial farm, when you're growing in a commercial area, you basically, it's all about profit and loss. So you put a lot of fertilizers on that are going to be readily available and, will break down quickly. And part of the problem with that or I wouldn't say necessarily problem. We're very blessed to have such great farmland in the United States, and we produce so much with these on our farm. But when you're talking about backyard gardening, going out and getting commercial fertilizers and using them, you're going to get some benefit from it, but those benefits are pretty short-lived because they're designed to be there, readily available, be used, and by the end of the season, they're gone. This eggshell is probably going to take maybe even a couple years before it fully breaks down. But once it breaks down, eggshell, that's calcium. And a lot of our foods that we eat, especially our vegetable scraps, and even some like garlic, the coverings on that, all those things, you think, well, I'm eating this. I eat garlic because it's really good for me, it has all these vitamins. I eat lemons because they're really good for me because they have all these vitamins. When you put them into your soil and you let them decay in your soil, a lot of those vitamins leach out into your soil. So, I might get, these supplement guys might come and shut me off because they're making a fortune. Because
I was going to say, I think every vitamin manufacturer here in the U.S. right now is trying to figure out a way to, how do we reach Brother Jim?
right. This guy, we gotta stop just be telling people this, but it's the reality that we live in. We talk about grandma and grandpa and how healthy they were, and they lived these long lives, and they were so active. But a lot of it is because they grew stuff on their own, and when they grew stuff, they saved everything and they put it back into the soil. They grew their soil, and so at the beginning of the year, that picture, I want to share that with you because I take those big pots, I dump them out because I'm going to start the cycle over again. But I've just grown my own soil because if you go out and you buy it, it's expensive. But I'll fill my garden beds with all these pots because they're going to lower throughout the year and stuff. But it keeps my soil really rich. So if we go to the next slide.
So before we do that, Brother Jim, so just I think some of our audience might be able to benefit from this. When we talk about soil, it's more than just, and forgive my choice of the words, the dirt that's in the ground, but it's a combination of that plus the nutrients and everything else that because to hear the term grow your own soil, it's something that I actually have never heard before, but it makes complete sense based on how you're describing, you're sort of cultivating this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Soil is alive, just like your plants are alive. And especially like here in Florida, where you look at sand's not so much alive. Sand is probably the last leg of soil. A lot of times, like here, we have Florida largely because of erosion. So it's really the water, the air, everything else has bled out those nutrients. And really at the end of the day, if you go to the Sahara Desert, there's parts of the Sahara Desert that once were lush forests. And what's happened, because of over farming, because of climate change and all kinds of different variables, it's now this vast desert. You can't grow anything there. Sand is dead. So especially here in Florida, that's really why I went to using raised beds, because if you just try to dig down into most soil in Florida, you're not going to find a nutrient rich. And if you don't grow your soil, sand doesn't hold on to those nutrients. So people who are constantly putting fertilizers on, they're constantly adding things to their soil that way, it leaches out because there's nothing to grab a hold of. There's no structure there. And when you get into soil, that's another important word. It's the soil structure. And you want a soil structure that has a lot of different things in it, just like you would like to live in a place that's not sand. You wouldn't want to live in a place that's just pine trees. You wouldn't want to live in a place that's just grass. You like a variety. We surround our house with landscaping and everything else, but that variety that entices the eye and gives us great smells with the flowers, that variety is just as important underground as it is above ground. So you really want to focus on thinking about growing soil, making your soil rich and bountiful, because that soil, and especially that's why, at the beginning of the season, to take the time to really prepare your soil, to add things to your soil. And that's incredibly important. I have a lot of compost because we've just always gotten into the habit of saving all of our kitchen scraps, and we eat at the house a lot, so we have a lot of scrap. But I also mix it in with other things. One of the things I mix it in is peat moss, because you can see in that picture with Luke, who's once again not too excited about weeding, holding up those flaps. But
he looks like he was coached a little bit there.
Yeah, right.
He looks thrilled.
After the third shot of smile, and he didn't, I was like, we're just going to use this one. But
Luke's such a trooper.
Right behind it, over his shoulder there, that's my compost bin, and it just kind of a lot of times I bought it online. It came with these rollers and stuff, and I've long since taken that off.
Does it turn? It looks like one of those that turns.
Yeah, well, I turn it. I'm the turning mechanism. I told Brother Robert years ago, I do my compost dance, right? Basically, I roll it around the yard in the area. So it's like good exercise for me. And
you said that you purchased yours. I actually got one, and I was inspired by you, Brother Jim. But I got mine through the city. The city, here in Orlando, the city provides a compost bin, and so I gotta pick at your brain a little bit more on to better use my compost bin. I think that's so neat, though, that we have tools available. I mean, like you said, these are table scraps that you can just throw in there. For me, my challenge is like the balancing of all that and making sure that I'm putting, balancing what goes into that compost to make sure that soil, I have to use my terminology correctly, right? Not dirt, that the soil becomes rich and all that. So.
Well, and that's a great. I'm glad you brought it up. We're incredibly lucky. There's an equestrian center. They do these big horse shows and everything else, and it's a big arena. And they have piles and piles of sawdust that they're constantly moving out of the arena and putting fresh sawdust down. And they're so smart. They take it, they pile it up, and they've created these giant compost bins, and they keep them well managed, because they have, if you just use straight sawdust, not great. I mean, you can kind of use it for mulch, but once again, it's the nitrogen thing. But that compost has been there for 4 or 5 years. It's been piled up and piled up again and again. It's so rich, and it's free. A lot of cities now are doing that, where you can go out and you can find compost. Call your city offices. You'll be amazed at how much is available, and they look at it as they're happy that you come along and you take
they're happy. Some more compost.
Right, great. But so we're going to go to the next slide. And so getting that free compost, working that bed, this picture at the top, you can see I kind of went in, we pulled a lot of the weeds. I went in with a shovel and kind of scraped the top of it, just to get a lot of that everything that's alive. Once again, it'll start decaying, it'll rob your soil. So I moved everything out, I put it in the wheelbarrow, and you see Luke there, I moved it over, and I had him fill a different kind of compost bin, because I have 2 different kinds of compost bin in my garden. And one, like I've been talking about, is taking kitchen scraps, and then I offset that with peat moss, just to give it some more carbon. Because if you have a compost bin that stinks, you don't have enough carbon in it. Soil's alive, and anytime you get too much of a singular bacteria, like you've put in a lot of stuff, and that bacteria is going to go crazy. They say, hey, this is a great place to start a family. Let me have 1 billion babies. And they have 1 billion babies, and those 1 billion babies are going to start eating. And when they start eating, and of course, Audrey's not here, but I think she can testify to the fact that babies poop a lot. They do. They really and they can put out.
I can attest to that.
Grandpa's in there, he's dealing with that fresh, and it's not well organized waste, if you will. And it smells, right? Well, anytime your compost bin is smelling, it's because you don't have a balance in your compost bin. You have too much, and it's typically most bacteria, they like a warm, moist environment. So a lot of times that smell is just a result of it just being too wet in your compost bin. And it's going to make things rot quickly because there's a lot of bacteria. But the problem is it's going to put out a lot of smell. It's going to burn up a lot of the stuff you would like to keep in your compost bin. So you want to balance your compost bin with, and I use peat moss, but any kind of carbon that's very dry. It can be leaves, but they have to be very, very dry. It can be, I've heard people use like coconut scraps and shreddings that have dried out. But the important part is that
I read somewhere that you can use I don't know, cardboard.
You can. I mean, cardboard is good. You can shred it out. That's great too. You want to make sure any wood product, whether it's cardboard or it's like pine bark or something like that. The trick is, and where people can get into trouble with paper products like that, is you really have to let it break down. It's fairly complex. It's very fibrous. That's a lot of the reason why I like the peat moss, because it's dry. It's already broke down largely, so it's just there doing the one job, and that is balancing my compost bin. So it's really great to, if it's smelling, you don't want to use it, but I don't want to waste anything. And that picture down at the bottom, I got Luke, who's basically he's taking those greens. And you can see in that wheelbarrow, the greens have some root system. They've got some dirt on them. And I don't want to put that all directly into my compost bin, because that green is full of water. If you look at the water content of most vegetables, they're mostly water, really. I mean, that's a good thing. We're mostly water. So it makes them, extra healthy and extra good for us. But that water is going to get into a lot what I was saying. It's going to create an environment where you're going to get too much bacteria. Things are kind of going to burn off, and it's going to smell. It's going to get messy. Nobody wants to go in their backyard. So I put it in there. I just grabbed some heavy wire, cage wire screen that I got at a hardware store, and I made a big loop out of it, a little tunnel, and so we just pile it in there. And what I'll do from time to time, after it dries out, I'll just flip it over. But at the end of every season, I get about 10 gallons of black, rich soil from that breakdown.
We need to find season though, because here in Florida, sometimes we get 3 seasons in one day. So when you say at the end of the season, what do you mean by the end of the season?
That's
like Thursday afternoon. So.
Look, it's noontime. It's ready to flip the compost, right?
Well, I usually about every 3 or 4 months, right? Like it's like a singular season. I'll go ahead and flip it out, and as that, like I said, it's going to break down, and you're going to get a lot of free, rich soil. And it's also good for things like grass clippings, and if you have leaves or things like, our garbage people love me because I don't really put a lot out onto the curb. I try to keep it here on the home and recycle it, basically. So we go to the next slide. And so, after you've removed all that green and the weeds and everything like that, it's going to turn over the soil a little bit. You don't have to do it a whole lot. I like to get down in about a shovel face and just kind of flip it over. The important thing is when you're doing it, you don't want, if your soil is well balanced, it's going to easily break up. But it's a great time. Like when I was in Tennessee, there was so much clay soil, and I had a big garden. If you get out there in the clay and it's too wet, you're going to get clumps and everything else. And I would just hate myself for getting overly ambitious and getting out there too soon when it wasn't dry, because I kind of would fight those clumps throughout the year. You can definitely still grow things, even if you had some clumps. It doesn't have to be fine like flour. As a matter of fact, you don't want it too fine, too broken down, because it, once again, gets into that word structure. You want a structure like a natural structure where you've got hard soil, soft soil. It's okay to have a little bit of rock and all those things in it. But, after you kind of do that rough work of it, you get in and you kind of fine tune it, and you get a nice flat bed. So maybe go to the next slide. There.
Oh, it looks like Luke discovered something. What was
I showed this? It's a worm. And talk about soil structure, and you talk about soil being alive. When I flip over that soil for the first time, I get all these great worms. It's loaded with worms. And those are probably, if you want to have good fertilizer, worm casings, which is you can look it up and see what that really means. But it really makes the soil rich. They're going to go in and they're going to break down some of the big chunks of compost that had stuff in it that didn't quite break down, and they're going to eat away a little bit more. But they're really your helpers. And another big thing that worms do, they aerate the soil. Your roots need air. That's one of the reasons why if you put too much water, the plants will start to go yellow. People are like, "Oh no, my plants they're yellowing. I need to put more water," and then they just kill them even faster. But a lot of times, if you have you want to check your soil. If it's not that wet, you don't want to put too much water on it. But the worms are going to help keep that balance. And so that's why I love to see my worms. I shared with Luke how precious they are. Like the two most precious things in my backyard garden is other.
That is so funny because growing up for me, I'm like, "Ooh, there's a worm," but y'all heard it here. They're good.
Worms and bees. I love to see my bees because I know they're going to keep on going. That's one of the things I always enjoy doing is, I've got areas in the garden. A lot of times it's just volunteer plants or whatever, but they'll bolt, right? They'll grow and they'll flower early in the season. And I don't pull them. It's okay to have a garden that's not perfectly manicured. The benefits of letting some things go to flower, letting them bolt, is it's going to attract bees, and you want to take care of those guys, especially in the winter month. You want to give them something to eat because they're getting their day started. You don't want to have to. I could never fast until spring, even though I could probably live a long time. But but you really want those bees later in the season. They're going to be very important. And this last image I have here, I want to share with you. Like I said, you can grow things year round. That's some kale that I keep that going almost all year round. I've got plenty of kale, and it's because it can take a hard freeze. It had snow on it. It can do that. So even if you're listening from further north, Virginia, Maryland, you can grow kale year long. I've seen farms in Ohio that grow kale, and as you harvest it, you're taking the leaves from the outside and you're letting that stem continue to grow. I've seen fields that had kale in it 4 feet tall, where it just kept growing and they just kept harvesting. It's such an incredibly hardy plant that it can really, you can keep getting harvest from it. And that's another thing, like with lettuce,
all that weather. That's awesome.
Yeah, it handles the weather, things like Brussels sprouts and everything else.
And it's so good for you.
Oh my gosh, yes, definitely.
So that kills some kill and everything.
I've got to, you guys are going to have to help me with getting some good recipes for kale. I'm still struggling. I'm
even throw it in our
struggling.
for all of those, that are sticklers to it. We throw some kale into the sinigang, and like even to like
I mean, I
different.
hear the benefits of kale are just ridiculous. It's
Yeah.
just such a good superfood, I think is what they call it, right?
Well,
But
it's
just
a
I'm
superfood today.
still struggling. I haven't found a kale recipe yet that
So actually, I've got a couple of questions, and I hope if you, I mean, people have sent in. My wife keeps bringing me in this board, and I was wondering what it was, but she had a couple of friends that are watching the show to ask a couple of questions, and one of the questions is, how long do you grow soil? Do you set it aside till it's ready to be used? That's a great question, and it's really it depends on the season. In the winter, because there's less heat, when I put it in the compost bin, it's going to take a little bit longer to break down. The good news is the bacteria doesn't tend to overrun it, so I don't put as much peat moss in it if it's really chilly. But what you really want to do like I mentioned, I put it in the bottom of the pot, and I let it go almost an entire year before I introduce it into my bed. One of the things about compost is there's times I use it directly in the soil, but even when I do that, I'll trench it and put it down deep. You don't really want to use compost too close to your plants. You don't want to use it too shallow because, like I said, that breakdown that occurs as things rot and that actually can rob nutrients from your soil. So you want to wait at least a year. If you've got that big pile, just leave it before you start doing it.
That makes a world of a difference for me because I thought the compost is something that goes like on the surface.
Oh no!
Did you see that? Did you see?
we've been doing it wrong all these years.
No wonder.
I'm like, why do you have eggshells on top of your soil? They're like, oh, it'll break down. I'm like, but how?
Oh,
Yeah, it's really it can like I said, and they've done a lot of studies, and there's certainly benefits to some things. We are blessed with so much fish, right? And my wife and I love to go fishing. And one of the things that I'll do is like great natural fertilizer. You clean the fish, you've got all these guts and everything like that. I'll put it in a bucket and add a lot of water, and let it. If you want to put a cover on that bucket and you don't want to accidentally kick it because that bucket stinks.
Oh, yeah, sure. It really does. I'm never ready thinking about that, but look at the bucket.
I've had the neighbor that basically where I accidentally spilled the bucket of the fish guts and they're like, do you smell that? And of course I'm like, oh no.
Smell what? I'm sorry. It must be the sewage line. That's my favorite. That's my favorite like reply. It's there's a sewage line someplace.
Yeah, sewage line. I'm gonna use that. But
You got some nice neighbors, Brother Jim.
But you want that water. You want a lot of water in it because it's a great fertilizer, but it can easily kill your plants too. It can be too much. But I'll use that. I'll put a little trench down in the middle of my row, especially with my leafy greens because it's extremely high in nitrogen. And I'll pour it down in there and cover it back up because once again it does still smell.
So when you cover it back up, wait. So you water. Help me do this. Okay.
Okay.
So I take the water, I pour it in, I water my plants with it, but I cover the bucket up, or I.
No. You have the bucket, and of course those fish guts have been in there for probably like 2 or 3 weeks. All right. That's why you want one with a big lid, and they sell them at hardware stores. Like you get these 5-gallon buckets with the lid. You want to keep it shut down. And then, like I said, maybe at night when nobody's out, you open it. but
I might wear a spacesuit while I'm out there.
But you can dig a trench, and because you don't want to put it right on the surface, mostly because of the smell, But you want to dig a trench away from your plants a little bit, like 6 or 7 inches. And you'll pour it in there, and then you'll cover it back up. And then you'll want to water the entire bed quite a bit, because what you're wanting to do is dilute that all that nitrogen, all the stuff that's in that decomposed fish guts and stuff like that. A lot of kids, and I don't know, still show it, like the American Indians would, you would see the pictures, and especially here in the South, a lot of the tribes would, they would put a whole fish down in the ground and then cover it up, and then they would plant on top of it. And my dad would always practice that in the garden. We had a big pond with a lot of bluegills, and they would kind of get overrun. So we had all these, tiny little fish, which my wife would eat. But we would.
I'm sure. I would like to cook that up first.
but he would use it as fertilizer, and he would dig down deep enough. Once again, you want to give those mature plants access. You want to give things time to break down before the roots eventually get to it. But he would do that, and it provides so many different nutrients to your plants. And once again, that's just going to make a much healthier plant. I got another question that came in. It said, how important is it to prune on a plant if it's already healthy and doing well? That's a great question, and I got to tell you, that's probably one of the biggest challenges, pruning and thinning. I'll talk about thinning really quick first, because when you put a lot of seeds, I always put a lot of seeds in the ground. Seeds are cheap compared to growing, buying the plant. Gosh, they're so expensive now. But I'll plant a lot, but you really want to thin out your plants. They don't have to be like it's, some of these seed packets will say 7 to 8 inches or 12 inches. That's for an industrial farm. If you're in the backyard, you just want to have like 2 or 3, and you can thin kind of based on their size. When they're little, you can have a lot close together. But as they get larger, you'll want to, so you're thinning like every other one or every other.
When you say thinning, I kind of get a little guarded, because I'm like, thinning. That's I think of myself. But you mean when you say thinning, when it comes to seeds, it's just like you just put a little bit of seeds here and a little bit of seeds there.
After they start growing, like, so you put a lot of seed down, and then they'll start growing. So you have all these seeds that are kind of packed together. So you want to thin them out, because they'll actually become competition with each other. That's always why I say me and my sister were always fatter than my 3 older brothers and sisters, because they were born right together, and we were like down the road, so we just had a lot more food to eat compared to those 3 that were.
Another example of thinning out. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Somebody needs to pluck those chips away from me, but having all those seeds in there, you'll thin them out. But you're getting a harvest. Microgreens, that's a big industry. If you go to a store, a health food store, they're expensive as all get out, and it's ridiculous because they're simple, super easy to grow. So I can start thinning and already start having a salad and start putting them in my soup or whatever. So you get this constant harvest as you thin, and then eventually, you allow enough space so they have plenty of room to kind of grow. Even in this picture down here, there's some bok choy on the back of that kale. I went through and thinned those out. As they grew, I gave them a little more space, a little bit more space. And I'm sorry, whoever asked the question, I know you were asking about pruning, but I wanted to talk about the thinning because it's kind of the same idea. When you're looking at a plant, especially in the biggest example is a tomato plant, you're not growing it because it's beautiful. You're growing it to eat the tomato. And pruning is all about energy distribution, whether it's a tree or a tomato plant, or if you're thinning things out. You want to look at a plant and you want the energy that comes from the roots and comes from the sun. You want that to be evenly distributed. And tomatoes are the worst, and I've done it myself because they want to grow, but the problem is their life cycle says grow as big as you can possibly get, and when things get tough, that's when you want to start making tomatoes. So people will take care. They'll put all the different fertilizers on it. And they'll have this giant tomato plant, and they're like, I want to eat tomatoes. I'm so proud of my tomato plant. It's not doing anything. It's because he thinks he can live forever. He's not ready to start a family. He's just like, hey, my life is great. Why should I, burden myself with children, right? So the life cycle is, as plants grow, they get to a certain size, and then they start to produce fruit. But they typically, for different plants, they're grown in different varieties. Maybe they originated in South America, maybe they originated in Europe, but all these, they have different life cycles. So what you really want to think about is when you're pruning your tomato plant, as an example, when it's warm enough and you start seeing a few blossoms, that's the time you really want to start pruning the plant. And you want to take off those branches that are kind of going wild or they're not structured. And it's better to do a few and see how your plant reacts, because every plant is different. People will tell you online, I see it all the time, you got to do this one, this one, this one, this one. And that might be true in a big industrial farm or something like that. But in your backyard, you got a lot more freedom. And I highly suggest, take a little bit off each day. Whether you're pruning a tree, a shrub, or anything else, you don't want to remove more than 20% of its mass at any one time. It will put the plant into shock, and it's not going to do anything. So what you really want to do is gently do it, and you can prune, maybe wait a week or two, depending on how things are growing. If it's looking healthy and there seems to be no impact, maybe even the next week you can take off a few more branches. But what you want to do is you want to let things have that energy distribution, because if all the energy is going to growing a tall plant, it's not going to give you big fruit. So once your plant, you look at it and you think, well, that's a good sized pepper plant, or that's a good sized tomato plant, or even with cucumbers and anything, if you feel like the plant is healthy and it's big, but you're not getting any fruit, you're not getting any flowers, go ahead and put it in a little stress. Stress is the number one trigger for it to blossom. I grew wing beans.
Wait, can you say that again for my non-garden terminology? I have to put in, what do I have to put in?
Well, what I was saying is stress is the number one trigger. And you can do that a lot of times. My tomatoes, when I had a farm and I was growing a lot of tomatoes, I would put 50 tomato plants out. And, to go in there and the idea of pruning those, that would have, I just didn't have the time. But what I would do, once I started seeing that first blossom on one of the plants, I would mulch it up, and I had these big metal wires that I would sandwich the plant together. Well, I would break off limbs on the plant. I would do that. I would put it into stress. And after I put it into stress, I would go out a couple days later, and suddenly there would be blossoms all over the place, because that stress tells the plant, hey, I got to settle down and have a family. I don't have all year, because it wants to make babies, right? It says, wait a minute, I only lived for 1 year. Am I going to be able to live next year? Things are getting tough. Now it's time to settle down. I just can't be growing all day long. I need to start making some.
Yeah, I think that's my problem. Not enough stress, because I just keep growing all day long.
But that's that's the best time. Pruning in general, or just gardening. I've got a lot of fruit trees. Pruning is one of those things, and whether it's pruning, fertilizing, or anything else. Growing up on a farm, and my dad gave me the best advice, and he said, to be a successful farmer or to be a successful gardener, the most important thing is to look at it every day. Because if you look at it every day, you're going to see when that plant looks like it's stressed. Maybe it's getting too much water. Maybe it's getting too little water. Maybe it needs some fertilizer. Maybe it needs these things. But if you're looking at the plant and you're seeing them, and you can even sing to them, plants love that. But if you're looking at the plant, you'll know when it kind of needs something. If you look at a tree and it's really bushy, but it looks kind of weak, you can go ahead and prune that back. One of the things I did, we were getting ready to have a hurricane, and I went out and I had a peach tree that was really thick, and I was like, gosh, that thing is beautiful. But I knew, because the canopy was so thick, that the hurricane might blow it over. So I was like, I need to let some airflow in there. So I pruned all the branches and everything. Well, sure enough, in a couple of weeks, I got all these blossoms and stuff. So it's like,
Wow.
and the fruits will get better. So pruning is about energy distribution. If you're getting if you have a productive plants and the fruit's small, that's poor energy distribution. You probably need to go ahead and cut off a few, even if there's some tiny little tomatoes growing, or there's some stuff like that. Because if you're not getting big fruit, the problem is you don't have enough energy. And of course, when you prune, I would typically, always water it well when you afterwards. When you thin things out, go in after you thin it and water it really well, because you want to reduce the stress. You can also go like within a few days after that water has had a chance to absorb. If the plants, look like they're healthy, and you can that's a good time to put a little fertilizer down, because that fertilizer is going to help make that fruit when you see all those blossoms. So I have. Do we have any questions? Does anybody have any questions out there? I know I answered. Thank you so much for sending my wife those questions, because that's one of the best things about gardening, is just talking to people. I've learned so much, going from, I lived in Florida. I lived in Ohio, then I moved to Tennessee, and, any place that you live, for me, I always go and find somebody who has a good garden, because they have the answers. Because gardening is all about your location. It's all about where you're at, because every environment's going to be different. Even within my own backyard, my environment is different, because it's a little bit on a hill. The plants, that are along the back of my garden at the bottom of the hill, they're much more susceptible to frost. I've got beds right up against my house. My house is brick. Brick absorbs heat. I can start growing things really early there, because they'll actually warm some of those plants, and it's a lot more protected from the high winds and the frost and things like that. So, once again, it's kind of like my dad said, it, good gardening, good farming is about really paying attention, looking at your plants. Go out there if there was a frost, and kind of see how your frost burns off. Where is the last place that frost is? See if the wind blows, which way the wind blows is coming in. You don't want fragile plants or weak plants in an area that can really get damaged from wind. So you want to have them in these little protective areas, but maybe just put kale there and grow no matter what. So
There's no set it and forget it when it comes to gardening. Definitely have to check up on it every day, and definitely be involved. It's good. Some really good tips. Really, really good tips.
I know, Brother Jim. Thank you so much. Every time we have you on the show, it's just really such an educational experience. I'm telling you, I've filled my library with information about compost, and I don't have a single live plant in my backyard, but I'm just going to start a compost bin, because
Right? Might as well
you made it sound so simple. I feel like I've got to put all of these tips to use, and that is such a I think a great way to be able to not just, of course, provide those nutrients that you're talking about into our soil, now that we know not to use the other word,
Good job.
but
Good job.
Thank you. I appreciate
we
it.
won't use that D word at all. But it putting in all of that nutrient rich sort of, for lack of a better term, waste into your compost bin is a great way to recycle. It helps the environment. And now we also know not to spread it on top, because that's probably why my neighbor's garden smells.
Yes.
So I'm gonna send them your episode, Brother Jim, to kind of,
Although it might be the fish water. Could be
Yes,
fish
right.
water.
too, out of our pond in the backyard. But it's gonna be one of those subtle things. I'm just gonna send them the video, not tell them why, but just, hey, maybe you guys should watch this. Well, we had a lot of engagement in the chat. We love hearing from everybody there. Tons of greetings for you, Brother Jim, of course. Having you back on the show is great. We're going to continue to have you on to bring us more education about not just gardening, but I think all of our favorite subject, which is food, because what's the point of growing all of this great stuff in your garden if you don't know what you're going to do when it's time to cook it and how to eat it? And we're going to be talking about that here very soon, and carrying over all of that stuff that we learned today, and how to go from farm, aka backyard, to table, with a lot of these plants that are going to be growing. But of course, we want to also give a shout out and express our gratitude to those who helped to make our show possible, and that starts with our beloved executive minister, Brother Eduardo V. Manalo. Thank you so much for continuing to support programs like this. To also Brother Angel Iranio Manalo, who's our SEBC CEO and CFO coordinator, and then to Brother Manly Andaya, our executive producer, and to our station manager, Brother Wally Tarai. We want to thank everyone, all of our viewers who jumped on the chat. I think the minute that they heard Brother Jim was going to be back on, it's like our chat just kind of blew up all of a sudden. Everybody's saying it's, if we look at the stats, we're going to see kind of this spike right when I mentioned Brother Jim's name. So it's great to have you back on the show. But we want to also thank all of our viewers who commented, threw in their questions. We're going to continue to, at the end of the month, which is next week, show you who our top engagers here in the District of Florida are. That's always a nice, friendly competition to see if we'll be able to hold that place. I think last month it was Sister Annalisa who was the top dog, if you will, of our engagers in the chat. We'll see if she's able to hold that position next week. But for now, this is Brother Robert Topalis here in Tampa, Florida, for Brother Jim, our wonderful guest there in Pensacola. And alongside him there in Pensacola, Sister Charisse, and then Sister Joy there in what I call the heartland of Florida, there in Orlando, in the middle. We want to thank everyone for joining, and please join us next week on another episode of INCRadio Florida.
This is INCRadio, DCEM 954, the voice of truth, the official radio station of the Church of Christ, or Iglesia ni Cristo.